I remember a time when my life felt like a well-baked pizza, warm and comforting with all the right toppings. My name is Arthur Miller, though most folks around Willow Creek, Ohio, just called me Art. I was 48 years old, and for the better part of 9 years, I had been the backbone of Sal's Pizzeria, not literally, of course, but I was the one who made sure the dough was proofed right, the ovens were seasoned, and the customers left with a smile and a full belly. I knew that kitchen like the back of my hand, every creak in the floorboards, every hum of the refrigeration unit. It was a simple life, sure, but it was my life, and it was a good one. I took pride in my work, in knowing that families in this town counted on Sal's for their Friday night treat, and I was a big part of making that happen. I wasn't looking for fireworks or grand adventures, just steady work, steady pay, and the satisfaction of a job well done. I had bills like anyone else, but they were always paid on time, thanks to the dependable hours at Sal's. Then one day a storm rolled into our quiet kitchen, not literally, but it felt like it. New management took over, a pair of slick-haired young guys named Chad and Kyle, fresh out of business school, I gathered, though you wouldn't know it from their lack of common sense. They walked in like they owned the place, which technically they did, but they acted like they owned us too. They didn't care about the history of Sal's or the loyalty of its employees or the quality of the food. All they cared about were spreadsheets and optimizing profits, which in their language meant cutting every corner imaginable. They started getting rid of the older employees, the ones who knew how things were supposed to be done, the ones who had built Sal's reputation. They called it streamlining, but I called it disrespectful. My hours started getting cut. First, it was just a few here and there, then entire shifts disappeared from my schedule. It wasn't just me. It was Martha from the front counter, who had been there even longer than I had, and old Frank in the back, who could stretch a pizza dough thinner than anyone I knew. We were reliable, we were experienced, but we were also apparently expensive and resistant to change. The problem staring me in the face was not just about my dwindling paychecks, though that was a huge concern. It was about the complete disregard for everything I had invested in that place, the disrespect for my years of dedicated service. These young Turks were systematically dismantling the soul of Sal's, and they saw me as just another outdated cog to be removed. I wasn't one to just sit back and let things happen, not when my livelihood was on the line. I tried talking to Chad and Kyle politely at first, asking about my hours, pointing out issues that were arising from their new penny-pinching policies. They'd just nod vaguely, give me some corporate jargon about strategic realignment, and then dismiss me with a wave of their hand, like I was bothering them from something important, like updating their social media. Other long-term employees tried too, but we were met with the same brick wall of indifference. Our next logical step was human resources. We all filled out forms, wrote detailed complaints, explaining how our hours were being unfairly cut, how morale was plummeting, and even how food safety was becoming a concern due to their cost cutting. But human resources was clearly in their pocket or just too afraid to stand up to them. Our complaints disappeared into a black hole, never to be seen again. It felt like they favored the new management completely, giving them free rein to run the place into the ground. The problems weren't just about disrespect and shrinking paychecks anymore. The quality of the food started to suffer and customer complaints increased, but management ignored them. Then came the truly disgusting part, the part that turned my stomach. Because of their cuts to cleaning supplies, pest control, and general maintenance, a roach problem began. It started small, a single scuttling shadow glimpsed out of the corner of your eye, but it grew and grew. Soon it wasn't just a shadow. I saw them in the dry storage area, crawling along the baseboards. I saw them near the sinks. It was absolutely revolting. Every time I tried to report it, I was met with a blank stare, a dismissive hand wave, or a quick "we'll handle it," which meant they wouldn't. They never documented my reports, never took it seriously. They were covering it up, afraid of what a real health inspection would reveal. I knew if I pressed the issue too hard, they'd find an excuse to fire me outright, probably saying I was insubordinate or not a team player. So I kept my mouth shut, but the anger inside me festered like a wound that wouldn't heal. My hours continued to dwindle. I was on the schedule for only 1 day a week, then none at all for the second week in a row. My bills started piling up. The stress was immense. I worried about how I was going to make ends meet, how I was going to keep my little house in Willow Creek. It felt like they were trying to starve me out, to force me to quit so they wouldn't have to pay unemployment. The disrespect turned into outright malice. I felt completely powerless, a ghost haunting the kitchen I had once loved. I thought about just throwing in the towel, finding a new job, washing my hands of Sal's Pizzeria, but the injustice burned too brightly. They were getting away with it, destroying a local institution, treating good people like garbage, and letting the place become a health hazard. Then the third week came, and again my name was nowhere on the schedule. That was the final straw. That was when I knew I couldn't just walk away. They had taken my livelihood, my respect, and were turning a blind eye to filth. It was time for Arthur Miller to take matters into his own hands outside of their broken system. I had been pushed as low as I could go, and it left me with nothing left to lose, only justice to gain. My mind raced, fueled by a potent mix of desperation and righteous fury. Human resources was a joke, management was corrupt, and my voice meant nothing to them. But there were other voices, voices that mattered, voices that could shut them down. I thought about the roaches, the endless scurrying I'd seen, the places they loved to hide. My blood ran cold, then hot with a new resolve as I remembered a truly egregious example. Those cheese shakers on the tables, the ones customers used freely, I had seen them. Roaches, not just one or two, but little families making themselves at home among the Parmesan and red pepper flakes. The thought made my skin crawl even now. This was my leverage, my secret weapon. I knew these two-bit managers, Chad and Kyle, were only concerned with appearances. If they knew an inspection was coming, they would undoubtedly try to hide the evidence, clean up just enough to pass muster. But I knew their weaknesses, their routines. They were lazy, they delegated, they wouldn't bother with a deep clean if they didn't have to, so I formulated my plan carefully, meticulously. I needed to act decisively, anonymously, and with pinpoint accuracy. I pulled out my old flip phone, not wanting to leave a digital trail, and found the number for the Willow Creek Department of Health. I dialed it, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs, and disguised my voice slightly, keeping it low and even. I told them everything. I described the general filth, the cutbacks on cleaning, and then I gave them the specific, damning details. If you want to catch them red-handed, I whispered into the phone, you need to go in on a Tuesday, right around 10 in the morning. That's when they're usually just getting set up for the lunch rush before they've had a chance to do much more than wipe down a few tables. And make sure your inspectors check the kitchen thoroughly, behind the ovens, under the sinks, and especially the condiment caddies on the dining tables. Open up those cheese shakers. You'll find what you're looking for there. I made sure to emphasize the cheese shakers. That detail I knew would be impossible to ignore. It was a clear, undeniable sign of a systemic problem, not just an isolated incident. I hung up the phone, a strange mix of fear and exhilaration surging through me. I had risked everything, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was doing something truly meaningful, something that would bring justice. The waiting was the hardest part. The next Tuesday felt like an eternity. I pictured the scene in my head over and over again. Would they listen to my anonymous tip? Would the inspectors actually go at the right time? Would they find the evidence I told them about? My stomach was in knots. Finally, the news started to trickle through the small-town grapevine. Willow Creek was a place where everyone knew everyone, and news, especially bad news, traveled fast. I heard whispers, then outright shouts. The Department of Health had indeed paid a surprise visit to Sal's Pizzeria that Tuesday morning. They hadn't just found a few roaches, they had found an infestation. A full-blown, disgusting infestation. The cheese shakers, just as I had predicted, were a breeding ground. They had found them everywhere, crawling on shelves near food prep areas, and yes, even inside the very containers meant for customers' food. The inspectors had wasted no time. Sal's Pizzeria was immediately shut down, deemed a public health hazard. They slapped a big fat B health rating right on the door, practically a scarlet letter for any restaurant. It wasn't just a warning, it was a death sentence. The closure wasn't just a temporary setback, it was permanent. The reputation of Sal's Pizzeria, once a beloved local spot, was shattered beyond repair. And the best part, the most satisfying part of my revenge. Chad and Kyle, the new managers who had so arrogantly dismantled everything I and others had built, were fired. Not just demoted, but outright dismissed. And because the problem was so severe, so undeniable, their own superiors, the district managers who had backed Chad and Kyle and ignored all our complaints, were also held accountable and fired. The entire rotten tree was chopped down, from the roots to the branches. I didn't get my hours back, no, but I got something far more valuable: justice. They had messed with my livelihood, disrespected my years of service, and endangered the health of our community for the sake of a few extra dollars, and they paid the ultimate price. The restaurant was gone, but the rot was gone with it. Life after Sal's Pizzeria was surprisingly liberating. For a while, I just took a deep breath, letting the satisfaction of my revenge wash over me. I wasn't just some old employee pushed out, I was the catalyst for change, albeit a silent one. I spent some time applying to other places, and oddly enough, the experience made me realize I had a lot more to offer than just making pizzas. My integrity, my eye for detail, my refusal to let standards slip, those were valuable traits. A few months later, a new restaurant started going up in the very same location where Sal's had stood, a promising farm-to-table bistro called the Willow Hearth. I saw an advertisement for kitchen manager, and something just clicked. During my interview, the owner, a sharp young woman named Sarah, mentioned she was looking for someone with experience, someone who genuinely cared about the quality and cleanliness of a kitchen. I didn't mention my role in Sal's downfall, of course, but I spoke passionately about maintaining standards, about never cutting corners, about the importance of respecting your employees and your customers. Sarah looked at me with a knowing smile that made me wonder if she'd heard the rumors. She hired me on the spot. It turned out she had heard about the previous establishment's demise, and she was determined to build something that was the complete opposite. My past experience, even the bitter parts, had made me exactly what she was looking for. I was no longer just Art the pizza maker. I was Art, the guardian of the kitchen, the one who ensured that quality and integrity were always served fresh. My new normal was far better than my old one, and it was all thanks to a few audacious roaches and my unwavering belief that some wrongs just had to be righted, no matter the cost.